Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I gotta give you a little bit of warning, okay? Today's case is very controversial. I actually was debating if I wanted to cover it or not, just because there are a lot of differing opinions out there. And sometimes I think it's okay to cover something that's controversial. Everybody can speak their mind in a respectful way. But then sometimes I'm like, I don't know if this is the time to be doing that. I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers, but I feel like it's a very important story that needs to be heard and needs to be shared. So I'm foregoing any reservations that I had and I'm bringing it to you. But I just ask, please, please, please be respectful in the comments, because not all of us are going to see eye to eye, and that's okay. But I just want all of us to still treat each other with respect and kindness. So we are going to jump right in. In 2015, Pembroke, Kentucky was like something out of a classic sitcom, like one of those shows that is set in a small, tight-knit little town, kind of like Gilmore Girls, if you're familiar with that, or even, what's that other one? Parks and Rec, I think is what it's called. Now, Pembroke was a small town with a population of about just 700 people, and it was also out in the middle of nowhere. There were a ton of wide open fields as far as you could see. And the town was in a county called Christian County, which I have to say, the name fits perfectly. It's a very religious area, lots of churches, there's a main street, a downtown, it's lined with brick buildings. I mean, you get the picture. You could almost make a Hallmark movie there. It's just a very American heartland, small town, wholesome kind of vibe. And it was also the home to Calvin and Pamela Phillips, who went by Cal and Pam. They were very close in age. Cal was 59 and his wife Pam was 58. Now, Cal had a long face kind of and floppy dark hair, where Pam also had dark hair, which she usually kept at about chin length. She had round cheeks where she had this big smile, and they were just a great couple. Now, Cal and Pam were both very religious, which again, it means that they fit well in Pembroke. When he was younger, Cal had been in the military, and during that time, he realized that he loved traveling. He was all about going around the world, seeing new places, going to new countries, and he liked it so much that when he retired and went to civilian life, he and Pam kept making a lot of trips. They wanted to do it all, see it all. Now, Cal also had a reputation for being a very big talker. I mean, once you started a conversation, he would just go on and on, almost like holding you hostage. He would just say whatever he had on his mind. He and Pam had one son, Matt, and for 10 years or so, Pam was a stay-at-home mom just doing everything that she could possibly do for Matt. Eventually, though, she decided she was ready to go back to work. She wanted to earn some money, and she kept busy with that. She was rising through the ranks until she finally became the vice president of a bank. Her main job was making sure that everything at the bank was legal, that they were all following the rules, they weren't doing anything that could get them into trouble. And that was all while she was also still doing the mom thing. She was volunteering, helping out around town, just kind of juggling it all. Now again, I know I said this before, but it is worth repeating. Pembroke felt like a typical small town, almost like something out of a TV show. And the Phillipses were your typical family in that town. They lived on a nice residential street. It was literally called Main Street, and they knew all of their neighbors. Everybody got along. They all kept an eye on each other's houses whenever they went on vacation. They all knew everybody's routines. They would notice if somebody missed picking up a newspaper that morning, or if maybe they hadn't gotten the mail. Literally, if anything was off, they would notice. I mean, there was even a 93-year-old man on Main Street, and all of the locals just knew him as Mr. Charlie, and his wife was Miss Ellen. So even though he was really getting up there in age, Mr. Charlie always did his own yard work, all the way up until he died of old age. He was always out in the yard, mowing and raking, and people just knew to expect to see him out there. Another neighbor was a 47-year-old Army major named Christian Martin. He went by Kit for short, and Kit had been in the Army as a pilot for 30 years. He literally enlisted when he was just 17 years old. And during that time, he won a ton of awards. He won 3 Bronze Stars, a Combat Action Badge, and an Air Medal. I mean, seriously, he was a star so far as his career went. He lived right across the street from Pam and Cal, and Kit and his wife Joan had 3 kids together. More specifically, I should say actually that Joan had 3 kids from a previous relationship, yet Kit, he just did the dad thing. He tried to be present in their lives and really take them on as his own. And also on that same street, Cal and Pam had a neighbor named Edward Danzuro. He went by Ed for short. He was a bit older too. He had a little bit of a receding hairline. His beard and mustache had already gone completely white, even though his hair on his head was still darker. And Ed was 63 years old, but he was still working. He was a professional piano player, and he would just give these jazz performances that would truly blow people away. Now, interestingly, Ed didn't actually own his own house. It belonged to a friend of his. The friend inherited the house when his parents died, so he wanted to rent it out to somebody that he trusted. Somebody who would keep everything neat, nice, clean, not break anything, not throw any wild parties. So Ed paid a little tiny amount for rent, almost I think it was $100 or something for the entire house, and he also helped take care of little chores and handiwork whenever he needed to. On weekends, Ed would go out of town. He would visit his girlfriend, who he was with for 13 years at that point, named Sally Jackson. Sometimes she would come there and visit him, but they would go back and forth. That was, of course, when he wasn't hitting the local bars and restaurants playing the piano, doing the jazz thing. So on Main Street in Pembroke, everybody knew their neighbors. Everybody got along. And at least once, there was even a Friendsgiving dinner there, which it sounds like Ed, Sally, Cal, and Pam, they all realized that they weren't going to be seeing family that year. So they just decided to do a Friendsgiving, celebrate together instead. Now, besides being a great pianist, Ed was also a fantastic cook. So I can only imagine how amazing all of the food was. The turkey, the potatoes, the cranberry sauce, everything else. It was just amazing. But as we know, perfect, happy little neighborhoods, they can't last forever. And that was pretty easy to see by November 18th of 2015. Thanksgiving was coming up, but I want to be clear, this wasn't the year of the Friendsgiving. This time around, everybody had their own plans. Ed and Sally were going to go do something on their own. Cal and Pam were also spending the holidays with their own family. And on top of that, Cal and Pam were in the middle of making some repairs around their house. It wasn't a full-on renovation with all of the floors and walls getting torn up. I mean, the house was a mess. There were piles of wood and tools just lying around everywhere, so it wasn't really a good situation to be hosting a big family dinner. But on that day, the 18th, they were expecting the delivery of a washing machine that needed to be installed. Cal was supposed to be home all day to meet the delivery driver, let him in, make sure everything was set up correctly, all of those things. And in the meantime, Pam was working at her job at the bank. There was no need for both of them to take the day off. So anyway, during the workday around 11 a.m., Pam got a call from the delivery driver. He said that he was at the house and he was trying to deliver the washing machine, but nobody answered when he rang the bell or knocked, so he couldn't drop anything off or, install it. Now, at first, Pam was pissed because remember, what I said before about how life kind of just felt like it was out of a sitcom? Well, in Pam's case, she was kind of thinking something like, I can't believe that my husband is being so useless right now that he forgot. You had one job to do. Why couldn't you do it right? All Cal had to do was be home, open the door, let the driver in, and he wasn't even doing that. Now, worst of all, by the time the delivery company was on the phone with Pam, the driver had already left. So it's not like she could just take an hour off, drive home, let him in, take care of things. Cal really had screwed up the plans here. Now, she wasn't sure if he had wandered off somewhere or maybe he got bored and left the house or something like that. So Pam called Cal to ask him what was going on. Maybe get mad at him, get angry at him, see what was up. But the problem was Cal wasn't answering. Her call went to voicemail, so she hung up and she tried again. But Cal didn't pick up this time either. So Pam just kept dialing over and over, literally for hours, pretty much all day long. She was just calling and getting nowhere. So by that evening, she was rethinking the situation. The more time that went without Cal answering, the more she was thinking that maybe he wasn't just being flaky, maybe something was seriously wrong here. So Pam left work, and her shift wasn't over. It was only 5 p.m., but she told her coworkers what was going on and how she was worried and how she had to go see her husband. She probably didn't want to worry them because she kind of just said that his phone might be broken since he wasn't answering, but in reality, she needed to check on Cal in person and see if he was okay. She was also still doing her best to act calm and act normal when she left the bank. A friend of hers was in the parking lot at the time taking pictures of the sunset, so Pam kind of just pulled up in her car and asked the friend to take her picture too, which the friend did. Which I don't really know why you would do that in a moment like that if you're rushing to check on your husband, if you're kind of oh, you're taking pictures of the sunset, can you take a picture of me as well? But she did that. And spoiler alert, this was the last photo that anyone would ever take of Pam while she was alive. Once she did get to the house at around 5:30, the first thing that she did was look around for Cal, but she didn't see him. However, she did notice that there was a message on the answering machine. The message was from a family friend named Marlene LaRocque, and the message was from a few hours earlier. So Pam called Marlene back, she told her what was going on, and if she wasn't freaked out before, what Marlene had to say, it must have made her feel terrified. Because Marlene was also getting worried about Cal. See, earlier that day she had called and left that message, but when he didn't call her back over the course of a few hours, she came over to the house. She was also trying to check up on him. And when she got to Cal's house, he wasn't home. However, the door was opened, which was not a thing that he or Pam ever did. Even as safe and as close-knit as their street was, they always kept the door locked whenever they weren't home. They definitely wouldn't prop it open and then go wander off. So Marlene literally told Pam, I went by there earlier and the house was wide open. And she could tell that Pam was shocked because Pam replied, she's all, wide open? Then, before Marlene could say anything else, Pam said, hold on a minute, don't hang up. I hear something. Then, the next thing that Marlene heard was a scream followed by complete silence. Which, can you even imagine being in Marlene's shoes in that situation? One person goes missing. Nobody knows what happened to Cal. Then his wife also disappears basically mid-sentence, all while you're on the phone. And what would you do? I mean, if I was on the phone with somebody and I heard them scream and then something happened, I would probably immediately freak out and call the police, obviously, but it's a very jarring position to be in. And I know how I kept repeating myself, that idea earlier, how Pembroke feels like it's out of a movie. But now, at this point, this whole situation, it was feeling more like a horror movie come to life. And you know how when you're watching a scary movie, there's always that scene where the person decides to go to the attic or the basement and they want to investigate for themselves. And you're watching and you're seeing the TV and you're like, don't go in there, the person's gonna get you. Like, are you a moron? Why would you do that? That's what this felt like. Because brace yourself. This case is about to have one of those moments. See, Marlene lived just a few minutes away from Cal and Pam, not too far at all. And that's why she had been willing to drive by and check on Cal earlier in the day. It was a really quick trip for her. And now, with whatever was going on with Pam, she decided to go back to the house a second time. She wanted to see what was going on. And Marlene also brought her daughter with her. They made it all the way up to the porch. Marlene opened the door, which was still unlocked, and she went inside. And I don't know what was a moment in that point that changed her mind, but thank God, because that's when she realized that this was actually a really bad idea. Whoever had done something to Cal, and apparently also might have hurt Pam, might still be in there. Marlene, yes, wanted to help her friend, but she also wasn't willing to be victim number 3. Not to mention she had her daughter with her. So she turned around and she went back out of the house. Now, what she didn't do, and I don't quite understand, is she did not call 911. Apparently, it never even occurred to her, which I'm not gonna lie, it's so frustrating to hear that. But also, I think it's fair to say that nobody ever knows how they're going to respond in a high-stakes situation like that. So I'm not gonna hate on Marlene or blame her for the way she handled the situation. Frankly, I'm just glad that she got herself out of the house when she did. Still, the police didn't even know that Cal and Pam were missing until the following day, November 19th. But they got clued in pretty quickly when somebody made a very disturbing discovery. There was a car that was parked in an empty field that was not too far from the local elementary school. And this car was on fire. Literally, by the time someone called it in and called 911 and the police arrived on scene, they could still see smoke coming out of it. And the fire had destroyed a lot of the car. However, the police could see that it was a Toyota Tacoma. They could also still see the license plate, and when the police ran it, they saw that the car was registered to Pam. Now keep in mind, they still didn't know about what had happened between Pam and Marlene yet. They didn't know that something had happened to Pam right in the middle of a phone call. But still, it didn't take them too long to figure out that something terrible had happened to her. Because when they got the fires out and looked inside of the car, there were burnt human remains inside. These remains were really badly destroyed. Literally, there were even loose crowns just sitting on the floor of the car because they had fallen out of the victim's teeth as they burned. It was so bad, in fact, that for a while, the police had a hard time figuring out just how many bodies were in that car. They started digging through the bones that were still there, and they did identify 2 skulls, and that told them that there were at least 2 people. A coroner was able to tell a little bit more though, namely that the deceased were an adult man and an adult woman. It took almost a full month until December 23rd for the police to identify the woman as Pam. Even knowing that it was her car, and after they talked to Marlene and got the full story, it just was a really long process to identify her. But I do want to backtrack, and I want to go back to late November, back when the car was first discovered. Because even though the police didn't know with 100% certainty that the body was Pam at this point, they did have their suspicions. They knew it was her car, and they had also found her wedding ring inside the car. So even though they didn't know if the woman was Pam or not, they knew that the odds were pretty good. So the next step was to go to Pam's house and look around, see if there were any clues there. And this time around, they were prepared. They weren't scared and acting on impulse like Marlene had been. They went to the property and they started looking around. But there was no sign of either Pam or Cal, not outside or on the ground floor. But there was a Glock pistol in the yard behind the house, and it had a lot of blood on the ground around it, which definitely did not have the police feeling any better about the situation and about what was going on. And then they got even more nervous as they went through the rest of the house, which I'm going to put the body cam footage on the screen so you can get a sense of what it was like, because it was very eerie. I mean, the house was a mess, which, no judgment. I know Cal and Pam were doing renovations. It's not really possible to keep things clean in that situation. You've got all of this construction stuff sitting around, tools and supplies. You need to clear out the rooms that are being worked on, which means having everything stacked up and boxed somewhere else. So it was crowded and cluttered enough that at one point in the body cam footage, you can even see the officer sort of like knock stuff over and like trip over it. But also, all of those piles and boxes everywhere, it kind of made the house feel like a maze, like something where you're just waiting for someone to be hiding in a corner or to jump out, to scare you, to come after you. Except that wasn't even the scariest part. Things got very nerve-wracking when the police officers saw blood spattered, and it was just about everywhere. Then they went down into the cellar, and that is where they found Cal, dead on the ground. His legs and his arms were bent at a very weird angle, not the sort of angle that you would end up in naturally. And it looked more like he had fallen down this way. He definitely didn't lie down like that. But it was also pretty clear that Cal hadn't just tripped down the stairs in an accident, in part because there was wood under his body, and the wood was burnt up, even though the body wasn't. So it looked to the police like someone had tried to burn Cal's remains, but it didn't work. It didn't catch. Maybe the killer just lit a fire and then left without checking to make sure that it spread from the wood to Cal, who really knows. But he had also been shot 5 times and beaten to death. There were a bunch of injuries on his face that clearly had happened post-mortem as well. And the bullet wounds to his body were consistent with the Glock that the police found. So no-brainer, that was the gun that had killed him. Now, based on the state of his body, the police could tell that Cal had been there for a while, at least since the day before. And that explained why he wasn't there to let the delivery man in, or pick up the phone when Marlene called and when she went by. Which, I'm gonna say right now, is kind of insane when you think about the timeline. The police didn't know the exact time when Cal was killed, but clearly it must have been before 11 a.m. when that delivery driver came and couldn't get in. Then, more than 6 hours later, Pam called Marlene and got attacked herself. Which means whoever did this must have stayed inside that house and waited for her pretty much the entire day. Or they left and then they came back around that time that she got home or a little before then. It's not like she came home and interrupted a murder in progress. It wasn't a wrong place, wrong time sort of situation. Pam was targeted. Cal too. And what's interesting is that even though Cal's body was in the cellar, the police knew that he hadn't been killed there. So the investigators used Blue Star in the house, and for those who don't know, Blue Star is kind of like an alternative to luminol. It shows blood stains which aren't visible to the naked eye. It helps just kind of pick things up so you can piece things together. And when they put Blue Star in the kitchen and on the porch outside, there was blood everywhere, just everywhere. Most of it was on the back porch, which told the police that he had probably been shot there. But there was also some in the kitchen. And that's where Pam was probably on the phone when she got hurt or killed. On top of that, there were bloodstains all up and down the stairs to the cellar. Obviously, these bloodstains were from the killer dragging or carrying Cal's body down there. Now, the question at this time was why? Why would anybody want to hurt this sweet married couple? And the other big question was, if Cal was dead at home, then who was that dead person inside that car with Pam? Who else had been murdered here? Well, as the police were trying to figure it out and looking around Cal and Pam's house trying to find more evidence, they saw something weird at that neighbor Ed's house. His back door was propped open, and he wasn't anywhere inside the house. He was missing. So they searched the entire house, and there was no sign of him. There was also no sign of where he had gone. So naturally, the police had to wonder if Ed had disappeared, and there was a man's body in that car with Pam, and it wasn't Cal's body. Could that other dead person be Ed? The coroner compared Ed's dental records to the body, and I'm not sure if they were a match or not because remember, the fire really destroyed most of the remains, but it was really hard to tell much of anything at all. But I do know that as it turned out, years earlier, Ed had been in a skiing accident, and he had broken his shin bad enough that he needed to get a metal rod put in it. And sure enough, when the medical examiner was doing an autopsy on that unidentified man's body, he too had a metal rod in his leg. So then the coroner called Ed's longtime girlfriend, Sally, just to double check. He asked about the metal rod, and the second that question came out of his mouth, Sally knew what he was getting at. She knew that the body had to be Ed's, that he too had been brutally murdered along with his neighbors.
Then the next time he called me back, it was, do you know if Ed ever had any orthopedic surgery? And I said, yes, he had a rod in his left shin. He got that in the snow skiing. I don't know if he was skiing or just playing around in Snowshoe, West Virginia, and that had been 25 years previously.
And that was somebody from the coroner's office?
Yes.
And how did you learn that he had been?
He called me back and he said, yes, he was the second person in the car.
The coroner did?
Yes.
Now, this is truly just terrible, honestly, and the part that really gets me is how much time passed between when the bodies were found and when the police were able to say with complete certainty that the people in the car were Ed and Pam. I mean, they were able to identify Cal right away. He wasn't burned up, and Cal's son, Matt, learned about what had happened to him pretty early on in the investigation. By that time, he knew that his mom was missing, and he knew that her car had been found and that there were remains inside of it as well. But then he had to wait for week after week to get the confirmation of what his gut was already telling him. He was ready to start grieving, to start mourning, doing the things he needed to do. And he literally had a mental list all ready to go for all of the family who needed to be notified. He had the funeral arrangements, everything. But he couldn't begin that process. He couldn't get himself any closer to closure until just before Christmas, when he got the news, because that's how long it took for him to actually get the word and know that it was okay to acknowledge that his mom was the one in the car and she was really dead. And as heartbreaking as that was, these delays were frustrating for the police as well, because their investigation was just hitting a dead end right off the bat. Now, as a reminder, based on the evidence, the police thought that Pam and Cal were targeted, that the person who killed them singled them out specifically. As for Ed, the thought was that he was killed for trying to do the right thing. See, Ed's kitchen had a window that looked right out at Cal and Pam's house. So if he was, say, making dinner or washing dishes or even just grabbing a snack, he would have had a perfect view of everything that his neighbors were up to. He didn't even have to be a snoop about it. That was just how the house was set up. You're in a kitchen for any reason at all, you glance out the window and hey, there's Cal, there's Pam. So the police figured that he must have seen or heard something over at Cal and Pam's house. And then the person who broke into their home and murdered them had realized that Ed had seen them too. So then, the killer had no choice but to break into Ed's house and kill him as well. Then, the murderer tried to burn Cal's body in the basement, and actually did burn Pam and Ed's bodies in the car. So the reason Ed died? He just knew too much. He was collateral damage. Literally, all he did was look out for his neighbors. He saw something, he did something, and because of that, he paid for his life. He died trying to do the right thing, which is so heartbreaking. Now, either way, the police were working at their investigation, trying to figure out who had done this and why. But the big first clue didn't come from them. It was actually from Pam and Cal's family. See, at one point, their adult son, Matt, was at their house, sort of cleaning up, going through all of their things, thinking about the funeral arrangements, getting things in order. And Cal's sister, Diane, was also there, along with some other family members. It was late November, not too long after the murders, but this was before anyone had officially announced that those burned bodies in that car were Pam and Ed. I mean, everybody knew, but it wasn't official yet. All Diane and Matt knew for sure was that Cal had been murdered and that there were still some things that needed to be handled. So anyway, I mentioned before that at the time of their deaths, Pam and Cal had been doing those renovations, changing things up around the house, right? That was part of the reason why they were buying that new washing machine in the first place. So there was a huge stack of loose wood on the back porch, things that the builders were using. Well, at one point, Diane went out to the porch for something, and she found something on the ground, and you can actually see the moment on the security camera footage from the backyard. She's not on the screen, but if you look at the reflection in the glass door, you can see her bending over and picking something up off the ground. It's something that was lying right in the middle of the wood pile. And I assume that that's why the police missed it at first, because the whole area was just so messy. Which, side note, it's too bad that these security cameras didn't capture anything from the murder itself, right? But still, it's chilling watching this footage now, realizing that Diane was finding a key clue in the murder of her own brother. Now, as for what she found, it was a bullet shell casing. So Diane yelled for the others to come out to the porch, and Matt and the others came outside and started looking at this casing. But they were all really careful not to touch it themselves. They knew that it was important evidence. They didn't want to contaminate it. So eventually, they did get the police to come in and collect the bullet and run all of the testing. And what they learned was that it had come from a .22 caliber AR-15. Now that is absolutely wild, because you'll remember the injuries on Cal's body matched the Glock that the police had already found, not an AR-15. Yet here was this random bullet casing, right here at the scene. Now my guess is that the killer shot Cal with the Glock and then used the AR-15 to either shoot Pam, Ed, or both of them. It's hard to say for sure because Ed and Pam's bodies were so badly burnt up, and I honestly don't know if it was possible to determine a cause of death based on the autopsies alone. But the police definitely moved forward as though the AR was a second murder weapon, meaning this discovery that Diane made, it was a huge, major find. But that wasn't even the biggest clue that Diane and Matt found. I mean, for real, it gets even crazier. Because while they were inside the house cleaning up and taking care of everything, she also saw some dog tags just lying there on top of the bookshelf. Now, I do have to say, go Diane. She found 2 key clues that the rest of the family, all of the friends, and even the police officers had missed. And not that these dog tags were super easy to notice because, like I said, they were on a bookshelf, but still, I mean, they weren't on the ground, yes, like you would expect if somebody had, say, ripped them off in a struggle. I don't really even know how to explain how they ended up there. I just know that's where they were, and she spotted them. But anyway, Cal did serve in the military. He had experience. So Diane's first thought was probably that maybe these belonged to Cal, that he had taken them off, set them down at some point, and maybe that's why the police didn't take such a close look at them either. Except when Diane picked up the tags and got a good look at them, she saw the name on them was not Cal's. They belonged to the neighbor, Kit Martin. So when everyone called the police and told them about the bullet casing and what they found, Diane also handed over these dog tags to them too. She just got a bad vibe from them. She was spooked. It didn't make any sense why they were inside the house. But the truth was they didn't really prove much of anything. All she knew for sure was that Kit had been inside that house at some point, which given how friendly everyone was and how all of the neighbors got along so well, it wasn't exactly a smoking gun. But still, it was enough for the police to think that maybe they should take a closer look at Kit. Just see if he might have had any reason to, quite literally, slaughter 3 people who lived on his street. Well, they found out that at around the time of the murder, Kit and his now ex-wife Joan had just finalized a divorce. Their marriage officially ended on October 14th, 2015, so 1 short month before Cal, Pam, and Ed were killed. But even before the divorce was finalized, Joan and Kit had been on very bad terms. I mean, frankly, they hated each other. On at least one occasion, Joan had actually called 911 on Kit because she claimed that he was being violent toward her. Now, those allegations were never proven in court, and I guess the state decided that there was no hard evidence either way, so they dropped the domestic charges against Kit. But he did get a restraining order against Joan, and Joan had a restraining order out against him too, which tells me that this situation, it was really bad. Wherever the truth lies, it was just very, very toxic. So obviously, the 2 of them couldn't keep living in the same house together. But instead of Kit moving out, the alleged violent one, Joan got out with all 3 of her kids. And they went to their friend's house who lived right across the street, Cal and Pam. When they got there, they asked if they could stay there with them. And just like the really good neighbors that they were, Cal and Pam told Joan and the children that of course they could stay as long as they wanted. So for a while, it was one big, very crowded household. It was Cal, Pam, Joan, 3 kids, kind of all just on top of one another in the same house. And all of them were right across the street from Kit, who could not be happy about this setup at all. I can only imagine how much he hated that his wife was moving on, getting a fresh start, and doing it in a place where he still had to see her being happy every day. Now, eventually, Joan realized that this wasn't a good long-term solution. So she ended up getting herself a new place. She signed a lease, and she told Cal and his wife Pam that she would be out of their hair any day now. She was going to move. Now, even though Cal and Pam had done so much already, they still told Joan that they'd be willing to help her with her move to her next place. If she needed them to pack boxes, drive her around, whatever she needed, they wanted to help her. And I've got to imagine that Joan did not feel safe or comfortable going back into the house where Kit lived all by herself. So I would imagine that she was probably like, yeah, actually, that'd be great. Could you grab some of my things from my old house? Could you grab these things for me? Play like, be Switzerland in all of this. Well, Cal went to the house to get the things that Joan had asked for. And while he was there, he saw something that caught his attention. It was a box with a laptop and some discs inside of it. And from the way that they were labeled, Cal could just tell, just by looking at them, that they were classified Army property. Now remember, Cal was a military man himself, right? He knew how to recognize private information easily, and he also knew that Kit had served as well. Kit was an Army combat pilot, and he was still part of the Army at that point. He hadn't retired or left the service. So the first thought, the only explanation that Cal could think of, was that Kit had access to this classified information because of his current work. And there are particular rules that you're supposed to follow in those cases, certain steps that you have to take to make sure that secret information, stays secret and doesn't get out. So taking secret computer files and disks and keeping them in a box in your house where anybody could come in and see it, that was a huge no-no. I mean, literally, this was a major problem. It was the sort of thing that Cal thought that he had a duty to report. I mean, looking the other way, it just wasn't an option. So he called the FBI, and they put him in touch with some military investigators, and he told them what he had seen. Now, during this call, he also mentioned one other red flag about Kit. And this was something that he had been keeping to himself for a while, from what I can tell. But now that he was putting investigators on Kit's trail, I guess Cal felt like it was time to just tell them everything. And I don't know the exact timing of when all of this happened, but at some point in the past, allegedly Kit had beaten up one of Joan's sons, and he had photographed it. Literally, the report was that this man physically hurt his stepson, that he was violent against him, and then he took photos and he kept those photos as a souvenir. I can't imagine why he would want a picture of that. I mean, what sick memories he was hoping to save forever. It's just so creepy. But somewhere along the way, and again, I know this is vague, I'm sorry, I'm just going by what's in the research, but somehow Cal saw this picture. So he told the investigators that yes, Kit was maybe playing fast and loose with secret Army information, but also he might have been physically violent against his own stepchildren as well. And the Army took both of those allegations and accusations very seriously. They did an entire investigation. And they found out that in 2008, Kit actually strangled his stepson. Not just hit him, choked him. And the boy was not even 16 years old yet. I'm not sure exactly how old he was, but I do know that Kit and his family were stationed in Germany at the time. And that wasn't the only incident. There were multiple times when Kit hurt his stepson. So the Army actually planned to court-martial Kit, and if that court-martial found him guilty, he would have been kicked out. It would destroy his entire reputation, and he would lose his job as well. So Cal was supposed to be one of the star witnesses in this court-martial. And let me just tell you, it terrified him. Clearly, he already knew that Kit was dangerous. He had seen what Kit had done to his own stepson. And Cal could only imagine what his neighbor would do to him when he was in the position to quite literally destroy his life. Which, I mean, let's be clear here. Kit was, yes, destroying his own life with his own bad behavior, but he probably was still going to blame Cal for being the one to testify against him. So at one time, Cal even called one of the Army officers who was investigating Kit and said he was nervous about his own safety. And this conversation happened less than 2 weeks before the date of Kit's court-martial. And then he never got to testify because he was murdered. Get this, he was murdered just a few days before the hearing was going to begin. So literally, Kit had such a strong motive against Cal, and the timing was such a huge red flag. Now, I will say, even without Cal's testimony, Kit was still found guilty of 2 charges, mishandling classified information and assault on a child. So he had to spend 90 days behind bars, and he was discharged from the Army. Now, honestly, to me, that feels like such a slap on the wrist, given how serious the charges were. I mean, yes, he did get kicked out, but in terms of jail time, he only spent about 3 months, give or take, locked up, which is basically nothing, given how serious the charges were. And he was still a trained pilot, so he knew how to fly a plane. He was able to still find a job as a commercial pilot after he got out. So naturally, some people were starting to wonder, would Kit really have killed 3 people just to get himself out of a 3-month sentence? Like, isn't that a wild overreaction? Although, who knows? Maybe if Cal had testified, maybe the sentence would have been longer. We do know that Kit had the opportunity to kill Cal. I mentioned before that we don't have any security camera footage of the actual murder, but we do have footage of Kit leaving his house at 9:11 a.m. that morning. Now, I know the timestamp on the footage says it was 10:11, but I guess that nobody had updated it from daylight savings, so it was 9, not 10. And this means that he had a little under 2 hours to hurt Cal between the time that he went out and when the delivery driver came over. And remember, it's not like he was driving super far away to go get Cal. He was just heading across the street. Then he came back home at around 4:15, which I have to say, that's interesting because that's an hour before Pam came home, before she called Marlene and got attacked or murdered while they were on the phone together. But I do think that this is interesting because after he parked, he loaded some stuff in and out of his car. There was a lot of going back and forth. And seriously, I wish I knew what he was carrying around, and if the footage was better, maybe we would. But I'm wondering, were there guns in those bags? Was there other evidence that he took with him? Maybe bloody rags, maybe cleaning supplies? But anyways, here's where things get really crazy, because there is no footage of Kit leaving again. Not any time between 4:15 or so and 5:30, when Pam made that phone call and apparently got murdered. But we know he did leave. And we know that because at almost 7:30, again, remember this timestamp isn't right because of daylight savings, but at almost 7:30, Kit walked into the house through the back door, meaning we don't know exactly how long he was gone. We can't actually prove that he was away from home while Pam was being killed either, but it sure does seem like a possibility. The issue is, though, that even with all of this evidence, the police didn't have enough to charge Kit with anything. In fact, the rest of the investigation lasted for 3 more years. That was 3 years in which the police had these dog tags. They had the security camera footage. They knew Kit's motive. They knew that it would have been easy for him to get into the house, knock on the door, all of those things. If he had knocked on the door or rang the bell, Pam would have let him in because she knew him. She trusted him. They had all of these pieces in place, but they didn't have enough evidence to move forward with the arrest. So it was a long, stretched out process. And during that time, Pam, Cal, and Ed's family did not get any justice. It was just waiting. The police even knew that Kit owned a Glock and a .22 AR-15, the exact kind of gun that would match those shell casings at the house. They had the Glock, but they didn't know where the AR was. And when they searched and tried to find the gun at Kit's home, they couldn't find it. Literally, though, they knew that he owned it. So the evidence, it was screaming that Kit had disposed of the murder weapon. But again, without the actual gun in their hands or the evidence locker, the police didn't have much. The same thing happened when a witness came forward and said they had seen Kit out by this empty open field where that burned up car was found, because it was now indicating that he was right there at the right place at the right time, but still, there was no arrest. Now, I can only imagine how discouraging it was, how everyone just had to be wondering if Pam, Cal, and Ed would ever see justice at all, or if Kit was just going to get to keep living his life, just flying around the world, having a great time with everything, just completely under the radar. But finally, in May of 2019, the police got the go-ahead to move forward. Now, unfortunately, I don't know what had changed by that time. I've done a lot of research, and nobody with the police department has ever come forward to say what piece of evidence made all the difference in the world, what tipped the scale so that they finally thought that the case was strong enough to move forward. And honestly, I'm not even sure entirely if there was a final piece of evidence that was found. Maybe they were just sick of waiting around, sick of leaving Ed, Cal, and Pam's family members sitting around waiting for closure. But the point is that by this time, enough was enough. It had been more than 3.5 years, and now they had a warrant for Kit's arrest. So on May 11th, the police went out and they arrested him. And this next part of the story is pretty wild because, like I mentioned before, by this time, Kit worked as an airplane pilot. And on that day, they caught him at the Louisville International Airport. Literally, he was in uniform and he was about to board the plane. The officers threw him in handcuffs right before the plane could fly away, and he was taken into custody. And I can only imagine what that was like for all of the other people on this flight. I mean, I know that some people get really nervous when they're flying. They start freaking out about everything that could go wrong. What if a plane breaks down? What if there's a crash? What if we miss our connection? What if they lose our luggage? All of those things. And now they're seeing the literal pilot get taken away in handcuffs. I mean, that can't really bode well, right? Like, imagine sitting in your seat and thinking, what if our pilot gets arrested for murder? That's probably not a thought that many people are having cross their minds. But then there went Kit, being led away from the gate in his pilot uniform in handcuffs. Now, the cherry on top for me is that the only reason Kit hurt Pam, Cal, and Ed was because he wanted to save his reputation. He didn't want them to go into the courtroom and testify that he had hurt his stepson or mishandled the classified information. He didn't want to lose the court-martial. He didn't want to go to jail, and he didn't want anybody knowing what he had done. Well, he lost the court-martial. He went to jail anyway. And now here he was, marched through the airport for the entire world to see. Maybe that's divine intervention or karma. I don't know. But he still had to go and defend himself in another courtroom. Only now it was on murder charges, not just for mishandling information and for assault. Not that those are minor charges or anything like that. But wow, I mean, talk about taking a bad situation and making it 10,000 times worse. So Kit's trial began 2 years later, in the summer of 2021, and you can bet that the victims' families were ready for him. Listen to what Cal and Pam's son Matt had to say about it.
I don't really have a lot to say. I'm just glad we're here and moving forward in the process. So if you have a couple questions, I can answer them for the family, and past that, I'll give it to you.
What's going on through your mind?
Yeah, I'm just glad that he is being called to what we believe has occurred, and I'm glad we're here. I'm really thankful for that. It's been a long, long way.
How did you feel when you actually saw him walk in the room? Because you weren't expecting that today, were you?
Well, yeah, we thought it was going to be a camera scenario, but, my feelings are, there's a lot of those. I can't really articulate them, to tell you the truth. There's a lot of emotion with this whole thing, as any of you would understand. It's hard, but again, this is our right step in the right direction.
He looked very nonchalant, if that's the right word, ambling into the court. Was that what you expected?
I don't know that I have an expectation or that I could understand what his mind is. It's not for me to really know.
What's your response to the not guilty plea?
I think that was predictable. But that's his right to make that plea and to defend it. And I think we look forward to that process.
When was the last time you saw him before that?
He would have been on his front porch watching us remove items from my parents' house after the murders. It's been a while.
So 2015.
3.5 years ago.
Now, Kit's lawyer actually tried to argue that he had been framed. Yes, framed. And the argument was that the real killer had to be Kit's ex-wife, Joan. Which, yeah, buckle up because this is about to get wild. Kit testified on his own behalf.
You know why I'm asking these questions about the morning.
Timeline? Get a timeline?
Well, the prosecutor's saying that you went across the street that morning.
No, I didn't go. No, I didn't walk the dogs that morning because it rained.
I'm not talking about walking the dogs. The prosecutor's saying you went across the street to the Phillips house.
No, I hadn't been to the Phillips house in years.
They're saying you went across the street and killed Calvin Phillips that morning.
No, I did not. It's ludicrous.
So to hear Kit tell it, Joan was having an affair with Cal. So when she took the kids and moved into the house, it wasn't because she needed a safe place to stay or a place to get away from him. No, she was basically moving in with her side piece and his wife. Also, Kit didn't say this on the stand, but in other interviews, he also accused Cal of running a brothel out of his house. Listen.
I don't have any direct knowledge about that. I was told about it by my lawyer and some other people, and I think, you know, I don't want to get into a lot of detail because there's some work being done on this area, but I think Calvin might have gotten mixed up with some bad people and was doing some bad things, and that might have been what all these murders were actually about.
According to Kit, eventually Joan decided to just murder Cal. And when she did it, she framed him because she was still angry about their split. She needed someone to take the fall for her, and since they had been living together not too long ago, he says it was easy enough for Joan to grab his dog tags, leave them at the scene of the crime, and frame him. She also could have shot Cal with Kit's guns, also that the police would trace everything back to him too. Now, this is a wild defense, especially because the police had actually identified Joan as a person of interest very early on in the investigation, before they ever even focused in on Kit. Now, of course, they knew that Joan and her kids had been living in that house with Cal and Pam, so they did think that she was worth taking a closer look at. But they also knew, just after a little bit of investigation, that Joan had a really good alibi for the day and time of the murder, so there was no way that she could have done it. None. Yet still, based on an interview that Kit gave after testifying, it sounds like he felt confident about his defense.
What was your sense of them reacting to you while you were on the stand? Did you look at them, or were you paying attention to Tom?
I was trying to give them, pay attention to them as well. I was trying to see if they were making eye contact with me. It was difficult for me to read. Some of them wearing masks. Some of them appeared to be sleeping. Their eyes were closed most of the time, so I was a little concerned about that. But I did what I could basically to try to, connect with them. All I did was tell the truth. That's all I've done from day one.
The good news is the jury did not buy what Kit was trying to sell. Not at all. They found him guilty of 3 counts of murder, 2 counts of burglary, and 1 count of arson for burning the car with the bodies inside of it. His sentence was life in prison without any chance of parole. But this next part is wild. I mean, seriously insane, because even though the jurors were convinced that Kit was guilty, a lot of people today, like I said at the start of this, aren't. There are a ton of people online who still believe his story about being framed by his ex-wife, Joan. They all think he's innocent. A lot of the arguments come back to those dog tags that were found in Cal and Pam's home. I mentioned before that they weren't on the floor like what you would expect if they got ripped off in a struggle or something like that. They were just sitting on a shelf, like somebody had set them there. So to some people, it seems like the dog tags were planted there to point the police at Kit. And obviously, Kit wasn't going to plant them there himself, so whoever did that, they wanted him to take the fall. That is, of course, assuming that that theory is true.
The most ridiculous piece of evidence I've ever heard in my life. The most obviously planted thing I've ever seen is this. It is actually ridiculous.
Now, in my mind, I think that it is way more likely that he was an Army guy. He was still actively in the Army, right? So I think he was probably wearing his dog tags. He goes to the house, he's doing the murder, he's killing people. Maybe they're getting in his way or he doesn't want blood getting on them. So he takes them off for whatever reason, puts them on a shelf thinking, okay, I'm going to grab them before I leave, and then just forgets to grab them. And I gotta say, the irony in all of this too is the fact that he went to prison for life over being so pissed off about a 90-day sentence. The math ain't math in there, is it? Like, get a grip, guy. Now, there has also been one more late-breaking development in this case, and it really is pretty crazy. And I feel like so often somebody gets convicted of murder, they get their sentence, they're locked up, maybe they file some appeals and try to get out, but usually once the jury makes the call, it's settled. You usually don't see even more coming forward and more evidence against them that's discovered well after the trial. But in Kit's case, a major clue was discovered 3 years after his conviction, just this past April in 2024. And the police found even more proof that he was the killer. Now, remember earlier how I mentioned that the police never found one of the murder weapons. They knew that one of the victims had been shot by a .22 caliber AR-15, and they knew that Kit owned one, but they could never find it. Well, during those 3 years that passed between the murders and the arrest, Kit built quite the new life for himself. He moved to a new state, namely North Carolina. He was engaged, and he was planning to get married. He also got his job as that pilot with American Airlines, the same job where he was eventually arrested at the airport. Then, Kit got arrested and he went to trial and he got the conviction. But after all of that, he called one of his sisters, a woman named Juliet, one day. He seemed very nervous, very agitated, and he had some very specific instructions for her. Kit told Juliet that he had just heard that his now fiancé was selling the house that they owned together. So Kit needed Juliet to go get some of the stuff out of the house before the new buyers could start going through it and move in. And in particular, there was a box in a secret compartment that was hidden underneath the stairs. Kit wanted his sister to find that box and find somewhere safe to keep it. Well, I guess it didn't occur to Kit that the prison would keep track of who he was calling or that anyone would be monitoring these conversations, but they do. And right away, the police were clued in. They knew that there was something important in that box that he wanted her to go retrieve. So the cops rushed over to Kit's old house. They went inside, they did a search, but there was no box under the stairs. So to all appearances, Juliet had already gotten it. So clearly, the next step was to question her. But of course, at first, she played innocent. She acted like she had never heard of this box. She had no idea what the police were talking about. Eventually, the police released Juliet, but I guess she and the rest of the family decided that they already had one brother in prison. There was no need for more family members to take the fall for him, because only an hour went by, and Juliet's husband called the police back to say that he had a crisis of conscience. He said that he and Juliet did go to that house, and they did get the box that Kit had described to them. And surprise, surprise, it had an AR-15 gun in it. Except according to Juliet's husband, they didn't keep the gun or the box.
Their call with deputies was recorded.
I don't even remember. The gun freaked me out, so I just put it back.
We did not ask for any of this. We don't want to get involved in any of this.
That's right. Kit's ex-fiance's daughter, a woman named Emma Spencer, apparently had the gun, not Juliet and not her husband. Except when the police tracked her down, she said she didn't have it either. So it seriously was like a game of gun, hot potato. Like, who's got the gun? Where's it going? Musical chairs. Who does it end up with? So the police then went to the neighbor, who finally gave them the gun. But the neighbor told the police that there was another piece of evidence that they were also missing. Originally, the box also had a silencer in it, but Emma had kept it. So the investigators now had to go back to her and basically say, like, hey, did you forget something here? What about the silencer? So she finally handed it over, and then the police had their gun. They also had the silencer. And get this, the silencer was a perfect match for the Glock that the police had found back during the original investigation, the one that killed Cal. Both the Glock and the silencer had been spray painted green, almost like a camouflage color. So clearly the two of them went together as a set. And it was obvious to the police that these weapons, the Glock and the AR-15, of course, were the murder weapons. Not only because they matched the bullets and the casings, but also because it explained how nobody had heard the gunshot that killed Cal, not the one that killed Pam, and not the one that killed Ed. So obviously, Kit had used the silencer to avoid getting any sort of attention. Now, like I said, it's so weird that this was all done and planned apparently as retaliation for Cal turning him in. But like, to go to such extremes that he waited inside that house and then left and came back all to kill Pam. How did Ed get scooped up in this? Is it because he did hear something or he saw something? Like, what an overreaction to so many things, and not for nothing, an overreaction to your bad behavior. You're the problem. You're the problem. It's you. Like, figure it out. And Kit has never explained any of that. He's never explained why he just sat in the house and waited, and why he waited to murder Pam after he killed Cal. But I'm speculating here. I think he probably knew that she would go to the police and share what she knew if Cal had disappeared. So if Cal died, Pam had to die too. But again, it was for nothing. He still got caught. And all because of his selfish actions, now 3 people are left dead. And a neighborhood devastated, families devastated, just somebody who completely wreaked havoc on everyone. It's disgusting. Thank you guys so much for tuning in on another case today. I'm going to have another one for you very, very soon. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already so that you don't miss those. And if you want even more bonus content, behind the scenes, more live streams, things like that, where we kind of just talk about different crimes off the cuff, you can get access to that over on Patreon. It's patreon.com/AnnieElise. All right, guys, until the next one, stay safe.